You are listening to the Examine Life with Bram Levinson. So let's look at our relationship to conflict. I've said often in the past that all the practices that I teach and all of the tools that I try to pass on to people are meant to be applied in moments of adversity, in moments of difficulty, ultimately in moments of conflict. We don't learn when things are fantastic. Okay, so when we look in the mirror and we love what we see, when our bank accounts are at levels that we are proud of, when everybody thinks we're fantastic, when we've got abundance going on, when everybody thinks we're fantastic, when everything is exactly where ideally we want it to be, these are moments that we don't learn from or learn in. We learn in moments of adversity. We learn when things get difficult, in moments of chaos. That's where the life lessons are. However, we don't like conflict. We like things to be easy. Most of us would say that we want an easy life. And so it is only normal that we look at our relationship to when life is not easy and assess how we manage those moments. Conflict, for me, is any moment when life goes in a specific direction that is not the direction we wanted it to go in, not the direction we predicted that it would go in, and the direction that we would like to immediately reroute. But obviously we don't have that control, we don't have that power over time and space. And so what happens in that moment of conflict is essential. And how we manage those moments of conflict is essential. And how we are in relationship to conflict is beyond essential. I think that conflict is our biggest hurdle to overcome. Internal conflict is our biggest contributor to external conflict. And external conflict is the mirror reflecting back to us that within ourselves that we haven't made peace with. So when I say internal conflict, I'm talking about the conflict that we discover exists when we are battling aspects of ourself. This is not based on anything that is outside of us, outside of the mind, outside of the body, but rather conflict within ourselves. An external conflict is obviously when you butt heads, when you come to odds with someone or a situation that is outside of you, whether that be political, whether that be economic, whether that be social. When we can't find resolution or make peace within, how are we then supposed to exist peacefully in our relationships or in our jobs, in our friendships, in our families, in our communities, and in society, in the world itself? And when we find ourselves constantly raging against the world around us, how can we then exist peacefully within ourselves? Conflict begets conflict. When we wage war against our own reflections, when we take issue with the appearance of the bodies we live in, we are choosing to spend our time immersed in internal conflict. And again, the first spiritual teaching, you are not your body, is one of the greatest ways to dispel this conflict. But nonetheless, most people either aren't aware of this teaching or don't know how to apply it. And so find themselves not necessarily consistently, but periodically in conflict with their own reflection, with the body itself. When we believe in our heart of hearts that there is something about who we are that makes us inferior to others, we are choosing to waste our time immersed in internal conflict. When we rely on alcohol or drugs or money or sex or any other crutch that helps us anesthetize from our internal conflict instead of dealing with it head on, then we're choosing to remain weighed down by the internal conflict that robs us of the peace that is equally as accessible given the right perspective and tools. Anything that is taken out of moderation, even physical or spiritual exercises and practices, can end up being counterproductive, leading us away from healing and keeping us deluded, numbed. Internal conflict is bred from the inability to accept aspects of who and how we think we are. An inability, rather, that is the product of judgment. Judging what's happened to us, how we dealt with it or didn't, what we look like, what we sound like, how cool or not we think we are, and obviously whether we are good enough, adequate enough to be of worth and of value. We have got to let go of the ego's need to hold a position of importance in how we examine, how we see, how we understand. To see through the lens of the ego is to be constantly comparing our experience to the experiences of others, or the experiences we believe we should be privy to. We need to learn how to examine with unattachment. Now, I don't want to use the word detachment, because in my opinion, detachment insinuates indifference. Like I'm detached from it, I'm not really paying attention, I'm indifferent. But with an intentional degree of not attaching to or personalizing any aspects of our story so that we can see it objectively from a place of equanimity and neutrality. So I really like the term unattached versus detached, because unattached insinuates that there is an intention to not buy into or to give more meaning to what is going on. But it doesn't mean that we don't care. It doesn't mean that we're indifferent. In fact, it means that we are very, very much focused on whatever the matter is at hand. So it would be good to be able to see all this from a place of equanimity, a place of neutrality, as if we're reading about someone else's story. That's the best way to, I think, contextualize whatever is going on for each one of us, is to depersonalize it. See it as someone else's narrative, as if we're watching a film or a series about another person's narrative. We need to see it for what it is, and it is a narrative. Your story is your story. It's just a story, and it will carry the meaning that you assign it, as all aspects of this experience of life will. So see the story. Understand how you've bought into the story. Awake to how buying into the story, giving it cognitive time and attention, has motivated you to say, to do, and to believe things that have kept you attached to that story. It makes it real. Understand the story is just that. It's a story. It's one that coexists with all the other stories and narratives that are equally as possible and relevant, and which are occurring simultaneously to the story that you focused on, because there's so many things going on in any given moment. The one that's become a motivating force in your life is only a motivating force because it got the most attention. Where we direct our attention is going to magnify and amplify the vibration of the object of our attention, right? So what we pay attention to is going to amplify the vibration of what we pay attention to. It makes it more important, at least in our observation. So we feed what we focus on. If you want to break up with the conflict that you've been in relationship for all this time, then reframe the situation. Spin the story. Assign an entirely new narrative. Give that narrative a new meaning. Find out what the experience was meant to teach you. This is one way to reframe. Instead of just saying it was something that occurred, ask, okay, well, if this occurred, what was it meant to teach me? So find out what it was meant to teach you, how it was meant to break through your defenses, and trigger what your heart has so desperately wanted to express. Because ultimately, I think that's what everything is about. All these lessons that are occurring through the more difficult moments in life are basically occurring for us to look within our heart and to ask what has not yet been expressed that needs to be expressed, and can we express that? We need to see the story through a different lens. And then we need to rewrite the story. Give it a new narrative, a different recounting, obviously of the same tale, one that doesn't end in conflict and depletion, but rather one that ends in resolution, in spiritual understanding, and the knowledge that what occurred contributed to your growth instead of your demise. See what life is meant to be for you, instead of clinging to the life you thought you were going to have. To quote Joseph Campbell, he said, "We must let go of the life we have planned so as to accept the one that is waiting for us." Conflict, I believe, awaits he or she who clings to what was planned instead of leaving room for grace. We have to find resolution. We have to find peace in our own bodies and minds. We have to begin to approach discomfort and confrontation differently. Do we do it by taking a page out of, let's say, the nonviolent movements led by Gandhi and Martin Luther King? Possibly. Do we do it by reframing our circumstances and situations so that we can see them from different perspectives? Possibly. Do we do this by training ourselves to meet discomfort with passivity and calm, so we can then observe how that discomfort elicits emotions that well up from the chasms of our fears and insecurities? Possibly. But we have got to find a way to deal with conflict that doesn't just feed it and contribute to its growth, to the way it sucks more and more people in until we have been tricked into believing that war and hatred is more important than survival, joy, and love. We have to find a way to deal with conflict that somehow alters it, that reframes it, that helps us understand it as being a messenger asking us to respond to life, not just to react to it. Now, external conflict arises not only from objection to a belief or a perspective or an action that differs from ours, but it arises from attaching to or identifying with our own take on the matter. When we adhere to what we believe is true or right, and refuse to consider any other way of seeing a situation, the foundation for conflict settles in. That foundation gets built upon the longer we stay committed to working against others and not with them. This not only applies to, vaster political and social issues like, let's say, immigration and civil rights, but also applies to issues that lie closer to home, like marital difficulties, volatility in friendships. Changing how we deal with others requires us to consider how others may be interpreting or personalizing a situation. So it's about walking a mile in their shoes. It's about being able to put ourselves in their perspective, to be able to understand what informs their beliefs and opinions. How are they forming their beliefs and opinions? Like anything in this world that is characterized by change, beliefs and opinions are changeable, given the right information. After all, every relationship tests us. That's why it's a relationship and not us alone in a room with ourselves. Now, some conflict is unavoidable. When we deal with intolerance, hatred, xenophobia, or any other, let's say, cognitive state that could result in restricting or diminishing the freedom and well-being of others, we will often fight to overthrow that hatred, that intolerance, remove ourselves from the situation, or simply agree to disagree. But while conflict may initially be unavoidable, it always serves as the spiritual messenger, asking us to do the work we need to do to understand why we find ourselves railing against it. Does someone else's opinion feel oppressive to us, triggering the fear that stems from our own past experiences or trauma? Do someone else's behaviors mirror back to us our own unassimilated prejudices and intolerance, causing us to unconsciously lash out at what we don't like, when what we don't actually like is what we don't like about ourselves, not about them. They're just mirroring it back to us. Does injustice somehow remind us of our own ability to oppress others with our own opinions and judgments? Know this, okay? When we find ourselves in conflict with others, those others are often reflecting back to us aspects of our own shadow, aspects of our own experience of life that we're less than proud of. Those who instigate reaction in us, they're our teachers. They are reminding us that in the spiritual understanding, there actually is no separation. We have hidden passages and storerooms of all the things we object to in the world around us and in others. It all exists within us. So if we want to see it all balance out in the world and our environments, we must balance it out within ourselves. We have to fight to find resolution from the conflict we encounter with the projection of the life that arises within our awareness. And after all, it's all the same. The prejudice we see in the world, the prejudices we carry about others, the intolerance we see around the world, the ways we are intolerant to others and to certain types of situations, laziness, xenophobia, privilege, superficiality, injustice, emotional knee-jerk reaction, all of it, as without, so within. And conversely, as within, so without. Once we begin to understand that it's all occurring simultaneously, okay, as different waves in the ocean of what we interpret life as being, we begin to understand the concept that there is no separation. What exists without is existing within, and what exists within is existing without. Ask yourself where your conflict lies. With others and the world around you, as well as within yourself. See how it's all correlated, how it's all interdependent. Tweak on one of the strings of belief and opinion that you've been rigidly holding on to, and you're going to see everything else shake and shiver from the vibration of you tweaking that belief. Start to take responsibility for the meaning you've been assigning to the point of conflict and contention, and ask yourself what different meaning you can assign to it. See the web of life connecting it all start to slowly unravel as new, more peaceful and harmonious and galvanizing connections begin to assemble. There may be fear of what it means to give up your long-held beliefs. There may be fear associated to letting go of old stories, thought, and behavioral patterns that feel comfortable. They feel familiar. You've had them for a long time, and maybe the fear lies in having to let go of these things that have, accompanied you for all of these years. But have faith that to let go of what has been keeping you contracted will always lead you to where and who and how you want to be. This is how healing occurs. This is how we all heal. It's how we grow. It's the evolution of a soul that is here to evolve by looking at the human terrestrial storylines and seeing them as malleable and changeable. Okay, the soul evolves through the human experience. The soul evolves by us being able to examine this human experience and not personalize it and not identify too much with it. Ask ourselves what it's meant to teach us. Ask ourselves how we can reinterpret all of these details. How can we respin the narrative? How can we change it? Because in doing so, we change our life. You change your life. You find resolution. That's the path forward. Immersed in expansion, immersed in spiritual understanding of what this journey is all about. Jump beyond conflict by examining what it is. Your conflict, what you find yourself in conflict with. Jump beyond it. And you do it by examining what it is, why it is, and what it might have to teach you about yourself. You are inherently the manager of your own life. I need you to know this. No one else has the ability to direct the narrative of your life than you. You may have given this power over to other people previously in your life. You may think that other people are responsible for it. Your governments, your family, your peers. Understand that none of that is based in truth. You are inherently the manager of your own life. Be confident in this. Know this. And the same way new parents always feel like they're screwing up because there are no absolutes in raising children, you may feel like you're screwing up more often than you're succeeding. But trust that you're doing better than you think you are. And keep going. The only thing that separates those who get what they seek from this experience of life from those who don't is giving up. Okay, so the ones who give up are the ones who don't get what they want because they simply haven't given it enough effort, enough time, enough persistence. In those moments where you think that it's time to give up because shit is just not happening, it's just not occurring, understand that that's the moment where you need to regroup. You need to remember these words. You need to recommit to the path, recommit to where you believe you are moving towards, and then keep going. Ultimately, you need to remember that success is not measured by what you have. It's not measured by what you've bought. It's not measured by your bank account. It's not measured by the way the body looks. It's not measured by any of the stuff that our culture encourages as being a priority. Success spiritually is measured by what you have learned. And one of the greatest ways to learn and to succeed is to be able to assess and analyze the relationship that you have to conflict and to be able to make sense of it instead of just leave it lying there as, the thing that you're going to drag with you throughout life and not deal with. This is about spiritual success. This is about breaking through all of the points of contention. This is about breaking through all of the old harmful patterns of behavior and thought that have kept us from understanding how incredible this experience of life can be. So understand that you have not only the opportunity, but the ability to examine your relationship to conflict, whether that's internal conflict or external conflict, and be able to make sense of it in a way that brings you to a place of resolution. Because where there is resolution, there is understanding, spiritual understanding. And where there is spiritual understanding, there is growth, spiritual and otherwise. Think about it. I'll see you later. This has been the Examine Life with Bram Levinson.